Welcome back, BTBG family. Welcome to episode 3 of the Foundation series, where we'll be talking about the soil food web. This is my favorite topic, hands down, of everything we're going to talk about. This is where I feel like things begin and end. So you can see that we have a different setup today. I wanted to get really close today, as close as possible. Of course, I have a GoPro, so I can't get you any macro shots. Not gonna happen. I'm sorry, but we're gonna do what we can here. I'm gonna show you as much as I can, and we're gonna talk about all the parts of the soil food web, what they do, what they're comprised of, what the levels are, how they help the plants, and how they in turn help our bodies. So let's jump right into it. We're not gonna waste any time. As a recap, we already talked about microclimates. We've already talked about soil taxonomy and soil type. Remember, those are two different things. Soil type is a derivative of soil taxonomy, not the other way around. Today, we're going to be talking about the soil food web. What I'm going to do here, I'm going to pull some of this comfrey. I'm going to throw it on the ground. I'm going to throw it, and that's going to be more food for our earthworms. Yeah. So let's go ahead and jump right into this. So the first question we're going to ask here and answer is, what is the soil food web? The short version of that is the soil food web is a complex community of organisms living in the soil and how they interact. That's the short version. Now, the soil food web is comprised of thousands of different organisms, bacteria, fungi, earthworms, arthropods, large nematodes, protozoa, and everything in between. And each one of those levels, each one of those sets of organisms does a completely different job in the soil, but everything works together as a system in order to produce living soil, to produce healthy soil, to produce soil that holds together and holds moisture, that naturally cycles nutrients so that it suppresses diseases. Let's take a little story time. So for me as a gardener, gardening almost forces you to live in the present and in the future at the same time, and a little bit in the past, because knowing where you've been, knowing where you came from, knowing what's happened in the past helps you know how to operate and helps you understand what you need to do in the future. And also it helps you understand what you need to do in the present in order to get what you want out of your plants and your fruits and vegetables. For me, way back probably in 2020, when everything first kicked off with the pandemic, with all the socio-political issues, with the geopolitical issues and everything we're looking at right now, I saw it coming way back then. Because as we know, as gardeners, we live in the future as we live in the present, because we need to know what's going to happen in the future so we know how to act now in the present to make sure that we can grow our plants properly and to make sure that our plants have everything that they need. I began really my true tutelage of plant science, of soil science, of understanding nutrients, micronutrients, when I started growing a very specific type of plant. We're in Washington State, so it's legal here, but it's YouTube, so I'm not going to mention the name of the plant. But in that plant, which is a very significant part of my own spiritual practice and understanding of connection, of individual small things at a time that result in collective and a collective strength and power and function and operation. Back then, I was growing hydroponically, and in hydroponics, you get very familiar with all the very small parts and pieces of the nutrient spectrum: the nitrogen, the potassium, the phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, molybdenum, boron, iron, sulfur, and everything in between. And unfortunately, with hydroponics, it is primarily synthetic. Of course, a lot of the bottled nutrients that we have now, a lot of them are derived from organic processes, but they use other processes within that they have to categorize as it's synthetic, because it's not completely organic all the way through the production of the bottled nutrient. But learning about all these different nutrients, how they interact with the plant, what they do, what they make the plant do, what they help the plant with growing, I started to really understand that deeply. And then I kind of moved over into aquaponics. Now, aquaponics is simply the organic version of hydroponics, because you're utilizing fish. The fish eat their food, they poop, they pee, they poop and pee, of course, is high in nitrogen and ammonia, and you're utilizing within an aquarium the nitrifying bacteria within the aquarium to process that into something that can be filtered out. And the way that I was doing it is that I had plants doing the filtration. The plants were absorbing all of those nitrates and using those components that the fish were producing all the time anyway. And it began me down a path to learning about how this process exists in our environment. The same sort of food web that exists in an aquarium for nitrifying ammonia, urea, and fish poop also exists in our soil. For me, I was trying to answer a question. How do I make fertilizer and be able to grow food without any external inputs? How do I become independent? How do I become separate and self-sustaining within my own system? A lot of gardeners on YouTube, intelligent as they may be, most of the time they're telling you to add this and add that and add gypsum and add sulfur and add wood chips and add seaweed and add fish emulsion and add. And I said, number one, I don't have that type of money to be buying all of these different components to dump into my soil, hoping that something happens. Number two, if I look around me, my environment is doing most of this stuff, if not all of it, by itself anyway. And here's the thing. Once again, we are gardeners. So our job is to try and make food as efficiently, as effectively as possible while still respecting the balance within our garden. So we're trying to adjust things and steward our soil and steward our garden in a way that helps to improve it, but not stress it out or create imbalances trying to chase a disease or trying to chase a certain pest. If your garden is balanced at all these levels that we're going to talk about here, 90% of the issues that you face, whether it be diseases, pests, or whatever, will naturally go away on their own, because the soil itself is also acting as a disease suppressant, as an immune system, as a weed suppressant. So let's talk about the different levels of the soil food web. Let me pause for a second, because once again, I feel the beauty within this science, it brings me to tears a lot of times because of how amazing, how simple, how complex, how diverse our soil, just this soil underneath us, becomes. Just in this handful of soil are billions of microbes. And you can look at this soil and see all the aggregates, how dark it's become, how loose and crumbly it's become. It's not compact, it's slightly damp because I utilize drip irrigation and soaker line to water deep while also maintaining proper oxygenation within my soil. It's gorgeous. So let's talk about the different levels. Now, it's interesting because this becomes a question of what came first, the chicken or the egg. Whenever you look at this system, the soil food web, it's very difficult to identify where life begins. It's almost as if everything evolved together and everything has evolved in a way as one system where there are no starting points, and everything in our soil has evolved to support one another, to benefit one another, and to create symbiotic relationships with its environment. Now, the soil food web is a study that was popularized and you could say created by Dr. Elaine Ingham. She was probably the pioneer of identifying the different layers and levels of the soil food web, how they interact with each other, and what they did in terms of immune system of the plant, and what they did in terms of helping the plant grow, and how all of these things work together to create a balanced environment. Of course, there have been some studies before that of the different parts of the soil food web, but it was never really packaged and put into such a way that was very clear and concise and direct in understanding that there's an entire cycle, an entire system that is occurring in our soil and around our plants that we can't see. So the first level that we have in the soil food web is the photosynthesizers. The photosynthesizers, things like plants, algae, and lichen. The second level are the decomposers and mutualists. These are our bacteria and our fungi. The third level are our lower level predators, the protozoa, the nematodes, the microarthropods that feed on the bacteria and the fungi. And the higher level predators, the larger nematodes, the predatory mites, and the insects that feed on the lower level predators. And then, of course, the largest in our soil food web, which include the earthworms, the large arthropods like the earwigs or some ants, the birds, the small mammals like the field mice, the moles, squirrels even. The beautiful thing, as I said before, is that this is a soil food web. This is not a cycle. It does cycle, but cycles are more step by step, one step after another. A web is this thing's interacting over here, this thing's interacting with that thing's eating that thing's eating this, the thing's pooping that, and that thing's using that poop to do other things. Everything is interacting with each other in order to process different plant mass, fruit that fall down and get incorporated into our soil. And that's how it happens in nature. You say, okay, what happens in nature whenever a plant grows like this? And that's where we talk about the different balances of bacteria to fungi. For our annuals, our fruit producing annuals, the fast growing crops, we want a higher bacteria dominance. And I'm going to put on screen the dominance that you want to shoot for when it comes to bacteria to fungi, when it comes to your annuals, when it comes to your woody perennials, or even your fruit trees. I'm going to put that on screen because there's different ratios that need to be adjusted or need to be facilitated to make sure that the plant is getting what it needs on the timeline that it needs to get. Now, bacteria are fast, quick breaking down microorganisms. They're breaking down the fruit, they're breaking down the sugars to help to reproduce and feed the next level up and the next level down. This is something that a lot of people don't know. The plant itself is not just absorbing nutrients. It's not just taking things in and making fruit. It is also actively interacting with the soil. This plant is photosynthesizing. Of course, it's using probably 60% of its energy in photosynthetics and sugars to feed itself and make its fruit and leaf matter and to be able to metabolize. The other 40% is going to the bacteria. The plant is releasing exudate. Exudate is a complex set of sugars that are being metabolized and fed to the bacteria that the plant needs to feed it. It's inoculating its own soil so that it can feed the bacteria that it needs, that will then give it the nutrients that it needs to grow. It's fascinating. So when we talk about the different balance of fungi to bacteria, when it comes to woody perennials, old growth forests, trees, you're talking about slower decomposition. Woody trees, woody perennials operate on an entirely different time scales. You're talking about decades, not a season. And as you're talking about this long time scale, you're talking about feeding fungi and allowing that fungi to break down these bits of plant matter that are higher in tannins and lignins that need time to break down. And that's what the woody perennials and the trees are then feeding on, is the sugars made from those compounds. All of this is a transmutative process, and it is fascinating. The next level is basically the organisms that are moving around. You have the nematodes, you have the microarthropods, you have the larger nematodes, the predatory mites, you have the earthworms, you have the birds, the large arthropods. Those next three levels are basically working together to take the energy that the bacteria and the fungi have then absorbed and transmute that up to the next level. The protozoa, the nematodes, the microarthropods are eating the bacteria and the fungi. The next level, the higher levels above that, the larger nematodes, the predatory mites, insects are then eating smaller nematodes, the protozoa, and the microarthropods, and some of them will also feed on bacteria and fungi, but their preference is the third level predators. Finally, of course, you have the highest level, which are the earthworms, the birds, the larger arthropods like earwigs and large ants. And that largest level, that largest organism level, are doing many things at once, specifically the earthworms. Earthworms are keystone organisms. Earthworms tunnel through the garden and the soil, creating airways, and the roots of the plants themselves need oxygen as well. The plant's roots also act as the plant's lungs, absorbing oxygen within the soil along with moisture. So the earthworms are tunneling through the soil here. Earthworms are tunneling through the soil. They're creating airways. They're munching up and mincing up all of this plant material and making it available right back down to level 2 of the decomposers, making it more available to the bacteria and the fungi, who then will begin breaking it down even more. Not only this, but earthworms' guts are also full of beneficial bacteria that will inoculate soil with those bacteria so that the soil can then begin to develop a stronger microbe colony within that soil. Another thing that people don't know is that it has been shown in many studies that earthworm castings contain plant hormones, and they contain plant hormones in significantly higher levels than any bacteria or colony in a hot compost. And this is one of the reasons why I use in-ground composting. The way that I garden and the way that I compost is markedly different than the way that a lot of other gardeners compost. I compost in ground because, one, I have clay soil. The clay soil naturally holds orders of magnitude more carbon per cubic inch than any other soil, than loam, than silt, of course, than sand, than peat. And I can do that because there is already enough carbon to balance out all the nitrogen that I'm adding into the soil. Another part is I'm directly feeding my soil food web. I'm feeding every layer simultaneously to boost the population and to kickstart my cycle of the nutrients underground. My earthworms are digging through all of the in-ground composting. They're mincing and mulching up everything, and they're also inoculating tons of that organic material with their own gut bacteria to help propagate beneficial bacteria in the soil. Not only this, but earthworms, as I said before, dig and tunnel through all of the soil, adding oxygen channels within the soil. Those oxygen channels are paramount to growing beneficial bacteria and not negative pathogenic bacteria. Beneficial bacteria is aerobic. Pathogenic bacteria is anaerobic. These are very, very important terms you need to make sure you understand, because that could be the one mistake that you make that destroys your entire crop. So as a recap, the 5 trophic levels of the soil food web are photosynthesizers, that include the plants, algae, and lichen; decomposers and mutualists, that include the bacteria and fungi, the lower level predators, which are the protozoa, the nematodes, microarthropods; the higher level predators, which include the larger nematodes, the predatory mites and insects; and the largest and the 5th trophic level, which are the earthworms, large arthropods, birds, small mammals. Now let's talk about the benefits, more of the benefits of a healthy soil food web. First, of course, is the natural nutrient cycling. This is the reason why I started down this path of learning about how the soil food web worked, because I was trying to become independent. I wanted to figure out, one, what do I do with all of this plant matter that's growing over the season, and then at the end of the season, I have to cut it all down? Do I take it to the compost, the hot compost it, or do I just literally return it to the ground where it came out of? The answer was to literally put it back in the ground. This entire process is a transmutative process. What these plants are doing, they're pulling nutrient up out of the ground, deep nutrients, all the micronutrients, all the macronutrients, and changing it into something that can be more accessible once it dies to bacteria and fungi and other organisms that would feed on its leaf material once it's back in the ground. It's the same thing that happens in the forest. Whenever things drop on the ground in the forest, nobody comes and cleans it up. Nobody comes and composts it. It lands on the ground and the earth takes it back. And that's what we're trying to emulate here. We're trying to emulate what's happening naturally in our environment, but we're also trying to get as much out of it as possible. There's a balance that has to be respected here. This system of being able to cycle our nutrients and recycle the plant material that we're growing up and transmuting from minerals and elements, this system that we're stewarding allows us to be independent of any synthetic nutrient input. Here's the thing, you can be independent, but if you want a lot more production, of course you may have to use some synthetic fertilizer. Now, the key is not overusing your synthetic fertilizer. As we talked about before, just a few minutes ago, we talked about how the plant itself is communicating and interacting with the soil. Whenever you start overusing synthetic fertilizer, what ends up happening is that the plant stops interacting with the soil. What this plant is doing is it is releasing exudate to the bacteria to grow the bacteria that are then supplying it with the nutrients that it needs to grow. Once you start adding a ton of NPK synthetic fertilizer, it makes the plant stop interacting with the soil. It stops releasing exudate. It stops building its own beneficial bacterial colony. And when that happens, you have soil death. That is something you do not want in any case, because once you have soil death, it's pretty difficult to rebuild it and to remature your soil, because all this has to stay in balance. We're going to talk about the next thing here. So the next thing is disease suppression. Whenever you have a healthy soil food web, a lot of the issues, the diseases, the powdery mildew, the downy mildew, the fusarium rot, the root rot, all those things begin to just kind of go away, because the soil food web, the healthy soil food web, is naturally dealing with all those issues on its own. It's outcompeting the bad bacteria. It's outcompeting the bad fungi. It's outcompeting the negative pathogens that would otherwise destroy your soil. Whenever you have enough earthworms, there's enough oxygen flowing through your soil to suppress negative and bad bacteria. We said this before. Bad bacteria is anaerobic, means without oxygen, and good bacteria is aerobic, with oxygen. Whenever you have a large earthworm population, you're going to have a lot of oxygenation throughout your soil to help make sure that your soil doesn't become anaerobic and start growing and developing pathogens. Another thing, the last thing that I want to talk about here, is weed suppression. Healthy soil food web naturally processes nitrogen into nitrate. I believe the chemical symbol is NO3 negative. That negative is very important, because in future videos, I'm not sure which one, we're going to talk about cation exchange, charged particles that allow for the plant itself to be able to absorb those nutrients through osmotic pressure and charge differential. So a healthy soil food web is automatically going to be making more nitrate instead of more ammonium to actually cause more of those weeds that we don't want to begin to be able to take root. The last thing that we want to talk about here that I think is amazing is pest suppression. Whenever you have a healthy soil food web, the pests deal with themselves. Some people don't like birds in their garden. I, on the other hand, love birds in my garden. Some people think that the birds are automatically going to start tearing things up and eating their fruit or messing their garden up. That's not the case. The thing is, you have to learn how to utilize the environment in its natural state. The birds are looking for bugs, and they're looking for water most of the time. They're looking for things that have higher protein, and they're looking for water. Whenever they start going after your fruit, 90% of the time, they're looking for water. So that's why I built the BCBG fountain over here. It supplies our birds over here with enough water and some bird seed to make sure that they're not hungry and start going after fruit for protein. I had a pretty bad earwig issue earlier in the season, and it wasn't until I started to really lean into bringing birds into the garden and allowing them to do what they do that I really started to notice a big difference in earwig population. Birds love earwigs. Now, earwigs aren't necessarily an inherently bad insect to have in the garden, because they do feed on other lower level predators, as we said in the trophic levels. But they can begin to eat on your plants and destroy your plants, creating little holes and making that plant basically think and know that it's under attack and stunt its growth. Now, whenever we first built the BTBG fountain, we wanted the birds to know that they had food and water. The birds then went from there, and I'm sorry that I can't concentrate because I have another crow. I decided I want to try to help the birds. Make sure the first step was making sure that they didn't start going after our fruit. So giving them water, making sure they have enough water, and then helping them out with a little bird seed. This encouraged the birds to know that this is a safe place and this is a place that they can find food. So inherently, they started going into the garden, and I started noticing them on my sunflowers. They started landing on the leaves of the sunflowers and started picking at the leaves. And I said, "What's happening?" And I noticed, oh, I'm not seeing any earwigs anymore. The birds were eating the earwigs. And then, of course, the birds are pooping into the soil, which is then giving even more nitrogen for the soil to cycle. All of these things work together. And if anything is imbalanced, you'll start to notice the garden began to express this in different ways, and more root rot and higher bug pressure and all types of different issues that most gardeners will tell you, spray this thing, get this type of trap, do this, do that, and all these individual things, rather than acknowledging the key issue, which is an imbalance in the garden. Now let's talk about how this relates to our own bodies. The soil food web microbiome, studies have shown, is almost identical to our gut biome. Now, many studies have also shown that imbalance in the gut biome, whether it be a weak gut biome, bad bacteria that have been propagating, whatever, if you're not getting the right nutrition, it begins to manifest in your body as immunodeficient issues, mood issues, anxiety, depression, irritability, sleeplessness, inflammation issues. All these things happen whenever our gut biome is imbalanced. Whenever we're eating food directly from the garden, we are literally taking the microbiome in our soil and all the biomes and the rhizospheres that exist in and around the plant and putting them in our body. And many studies have also shown how improving our gut biome from eating fresh food from our environment is linked to improved sleep, improved mood, lessening, if not eradication, of anxiety disorders and depression disorders, improvement and support in immunodeficient compromises, and everything in between. We are what we eat. A lot of people in this country are still 95% dependent not only on the nutrient deficient food from our grocery store, and we'll talk about that in the future as well, but they're also dependent on fast food. Fast food is some of the most destructive things to your body. Extremely processed, extremely manufactured, extremely nutrient deficient. Fast food exists for calories, and that is it. Whenever we are eating fresh food, we're taking in thousands of compounds, thousands of microbes that are helping us to not only fuel our body, but also utilize the calories that we're taking in more efficiently, more effectively, and in a way that actually heals our telomeres. We'll talk about telomeres in the future as well. It's fascinating, the science of the soil food web. It's fascinating, the science of understanding how this down here is not soil, is not dirt, but this is our food. And we're utilizing plants to transmute all that energy into something that we can biologically process. I am, by my nature, a creator. I love to look around and build things. I love to look around and figure out what I can do and create and build that's useful from trash, from stuff that's junk, from things that were just discarded. So from that standpoint, understanding how all of the microbes, all the insects, and all the organisms in this biosphere are interacting with each other to literally tear apart molecular bonds and elements to free up enough nutrient to grow giant plants, of which we can take the fruit and put it into our bodies, rebuild our bodies, and fuel our bodies into the day. It is the most elegant and beautiful process, I feel, in all of nature. That's all we're going to do for today, guys. There's a million more things that we could cover about the soil food web, but my purpose of this is to hopefully break these things down into small enough, simple enough chunks so that you can understand and get outside, get some dirt in your mouth, plant some plants, and get moving. There is a beauty and an independence in this that it almost becomes spiritual when you begin to really dig deep down into this. Anyway, we're not going to go any further. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you guys have any questions, any comments, any criticisms, please let me know. I want some feedback. We're going to see what we do in the next video. But until then, you guys, I'm Daniel. This has been Beyond the Box Gardens. Get outside, plant something. Take it easy. Later. Whenever you have a healthy soil,